I bring the gift of the Name Your Price tool to help you find a price that fits your budget.
Take it all!
Uh-oh. The Name Your Price tool.
She's not to be trusted.
Kill her. It'll save you money. The Name Your Price tool isn't witchcraft. And I didn't turn your daughter into a rooster. She just looks like that.
Burn the witch!
The Name Your Price tool, a dangerously progressive idea.
Just when you thought you were watching an ad for Miss Jones's lecture. So I want you to think about what you just saw, right? Obviously, you've probably seen that commercial and many like it many, many times. But why is that company called Progressive? Okay? It's because they claim that they're doing things that other car companies or insurance companies are not doing. That they are ahead, right? They're making more progress. So today we're going to be talking about an era of history known as the Progressive Era. So this is an era where we start to make progress and make some social reforms in our country. So it's really important when we're talking about this time period for you to remember where we've been, right? We've been in the Gilded Age. We've seen urban issues, things like sanitation and fire and water. We've seen issues in the factories where there are long, dangerous working hours, buildings catching on fire, children getting maimed by machinery. And by the 1900s, people are realizing this needs to stop. And so this is where we get people coming out who are advocates of social reform, okay? So for this particular thing, I want you to think about kind of some of the people that you might know today. My high school history teacher, named Miss Scioli, claims that she is says she is a progressive. She is somebody who is a middle-class white woman. She is a teacher. She supports change in society and social reform. In today's society, things like gay marriage. She supports things like some of the racial issues that we've been going on. She is a Christian, and so she puts a lot of it on Christian charity. And she's a really good example of what a progressive really looks like in society. So I want you to kind of keep those details in mind as we're talking through this here today. So you should have a chart that's got 4 boxes on the page that says like Intro to Progressivism or something along those lines. So let's look at it here and talk a little bit about who these people were and what they wanted. So progressives in general were not necessarily the people that needed the help, right? They're going to be mostly middle class. They're going to be mostly people like professionals, small businessmen, not your wealthy monopolists, right? Your middle class people, your middle of the road people. Again, think like a professional who is a teacher, like Miss Scioli, my teacher. They're going to be people who live in cities. People who live in the countryside are less concerned with this kind of issues. They're not seeing it on a daily basis, so people who live in the cities are around it more. A lot of these people are more educated. They also are going to typically be part of the social gospel movement. And remember, the social gospel movement kind of says that we should be acting like Christ or acting like Jesus acted in the Bible, where good Christians go out and help the poor. And that's just something you should do as part of your Christianity. And a lot of these people are going to be women as well. So a lot of the people you're looking at are basically middle class, white, city women, Christians. For most of them, religion plays a big role in this. And so these are going to be kind of the people who are initiating a lot of these reforms and doing a lot of these things. One of the things they also really believed is that the government should and could be more active in solving social problems. So remember, and we've talked about this, presidents in the 19th century, the late 1800s, there's this famous phrase where the people should support the government, but the government shouldn't support the people. Grover Cleveland said that. And there's this idea that it's not the government's job to provide welfare and reform. You know, that's something that should be taken care of outside of government. And it's not that the government didn't care. It's just that they were not really thinking that was part of the power of the federal government. However, progressives saying no, that the government needs to be the one who takes responsibility for this. One of the things, you don't necessarily have to write this down, but I do need you to know this term, the Cult of Domesticity. This is kind of where a lot of these women come in. So if you read this political cartoon here, it says women's sphere is the home, and this woman has scratched it out, and she has trying to find something to revise it with, so she wrote the home, the law, industry, the school, the stage, business, the arts, and instead she writes, wherever she makes good. So the woman's sphere is wherever she can do the most good. So progressivism kind of allows for women to be a part of the public sphere now. Cult of Domesticity means that they were staying at home and doing housework, taking care of the children, that women weren't really involved in society. But progressivism really allows for women to get out of the home a little bit more. So that kind of goes with the women here. So in terms of progressivism, there are 5 basic kind of types of progressivism here. So the first is workers' abuses, so kind of trying to help solve problems in factories and this sort of things. The next are moral problems. Then we have big business corruption, so kind of some with those monopolies. Political corruption, and we're trying to move more towards democracy here, and then trying to solve some of the issues of poverty. So these are just a few of the reforms that are sought by progressives. It's not limited to these, but these are kind of some of the biggies, and even some of them that were accomplished. So the first thing that they're really trying to do is end child labor. As we saw in the Gilded Age, a lot of children are working in really harsh conditions in coal mines and in factories, and basically these women and these progressives are saying children need to be in school, not at work. That is not their job. They need an education, right? So they're trying to end child labor. The other thing they're doing is trying to push for labor rights. So for people who are in the factories, giving them a maximum working hour, 40-hour week, a minimum wage, right? So you're not getting paid pennies, equal pay for men and women, protections in the workplace. All of these things that we take for granted today that are part of the workforce, being able to join labor unions, that sort of thing. Now, in terms of moral problems, now this one's kind of interesting, is that a lot of immigrants, or a lot of progressives, didn't really like immigration as much. And one of the things they really thought about immigrants is that immigrants really needed to Americanize. So you see this kind of push of progressives trying to push like immigrants into learning English and learning American customs and American ways. So really trying to kind of get immigrants to practice American culture. The other thing that they're trying to push for is prohibition, which means ending this the make and sell of alcohol within the country. They kind of saw that as a root of a lot of the issues. They also wanted to do a little bit of desegregation. Now, not all progressives did this. This is only some of the progressives that we're going to talk about, and a lot of the progressives are straight up racist. But that is on the list of some of the progressives that we're going to talk about, specifically some of the African American progressives. They also are looking for women's suffrage, the right of women to vote. Suffrage does not mean suffering of women. It means the ability to vote. It's eventually going to be passed with the 19th Amendment. In terms of business, they are looking for the government to regulate big business, right? Getting government to get their hands in big business and kind of solve some of those issues. Specifically, they're supporting antitrust legislation, so trying to end monopolies in the country. So remember, trusts are basically the same as monopolies. So they're trying to get that taken care of by the government. In terms of political corruption, like I said, they're trying to add more rights for women with women's suffrage, and again, that's the right to vote. They're also looking to kind of move towards a more democratic form of government, specifically with trying to get cities to be managed instead of by political machines, to have local politicians like city managers or commissioners to be involved in the government. They also want the direct election of senators. Senators today are elected by the people. That's not the way it was then. So they're pushing for this direct election of senators, which will eventually be passed as part of the 17th Amendment of the United States. They're also looking to kind of reform some of the voting issues, and they do call for and get a lot of this kind of stuff passed. So there's 3 kind of main things that they're looking here. So the first that they want to get done are things called initiatives. So initiatives are laws proposed by people. So these are laws that are going to be put on the ballot that basically the citizens of a city or a state come together and say, we think that this is something that we're going to take the initiative to get passed by the government. Now, if that initiative is proposed and accepted by the state or local government, it becomes a referendum. So when it's actually on the ballot, you are voting on the initiative, but that's known as a referendum. So you might hear like there's a referendum for a school bond on a ballot, which is like giving money to schools and that sort of thing. The last one that they call for is something known as recall. So this is if they don't think that a public official, a government official, is doing their job well, that you can vote them out of office. And it's kind of a way to make sure that politicians are doing their best, because if they know they can be recalled, then they will do better, right? This actually happened a few years ago in California, and that's how Arnold Schwarzenegger got his position as governor of California about 5 or 6 years ago, is because they recalled the former governor of California and voted for Arnold Schwarzenegger. The last thing that they are pushing for is the secret ballot in terms of voting. Remember, political machines could watch you vote, and that's kind of how they controlled who you voted for and who got into office. But with a secret ballot, they couldn't do that anymore. There's also this idea that you can make sure that real people are voting, not dead people, right? Because political machines did a lot of that. And then, of course, in terms of poverty, they established a lot of settlement houses and try and kind of help the poor, help give them education and this sort of thing. So those are some of the reforms that were sought and passed by progressives. I know that was a lot, but I want to look at specifically some of the specific people involved in the progressive movement and what they believed. So the first I want to look at is a woman named Florence Kelly. So Florence Kelly was an advocate for improving the lives of women and children, particularly in the factories. So she was really pushing for like ending child labor laws, getting, higher wages for women in factories, safety in factories, and really trying to kind of make their lives better. Next, we've got a guy named Robert Lafayette. He was the governor of Wisconsin, and he was a pretty progressive governor in the sense that he really led the way in the United States of getting the government to regulate big business, especially monopolies of railroads. So he really worked on busting those trusts of railroad monopolies in Wisconsin. And Wisconsin really ever since then has had this kind of reputation as the trust busters. And then finally a woman whose name you might know and whose face you might have seen if you have an old silver dollar, who is Susan B. Anthony. So Susan B. Anthony led the way for women's suffrage in the United States. And this happened when Susan B. Anthony, who was a teacher, realized that men and women in education were making very different amounts of money. She realized that men in education were making $10 an hour, whereas women were only making $2.50 an hour. And she and her sisters decided this wasn't fair and they wanted to vote for it. Well, it was illegal for women to vote, but they went to the voting booths anyway, and they were actually arrested for attempting to vote. And this kind of begins the women's suffrage movement in the United States. So I wanted to show you some specific pictures of some of these really quickly as we are talking a little bit more in depth in it. You don't have to write this down, but this kind of goes back to Florence here. So primarily women who are working in factories are young and single. Married women, it's not really seen as socially acceptable for married women to be working in factories. A lot of factories also wouldn't hire African American women or other women of color. In addition, we have a lot of women who are working in agriculture. They're working as domestic servants. In particular, African American women or immigrants work as servants in homes, like maids and cooks and that sort of thing. So that's where a lot of these women are working. So it was harder for married women to get jobs, right? So these are just some pictures here of women working in factories. This is just a woman working at a loom in a factory. Right here, this is in terms of children. You may have seen the movie Newsies. So these are actual pictures of Newsies in New York, selling those papes in New York, selling their papers there. These are some children who are working in a coal mine or a coal factory, and you can see that the conditions are really bad. They even have children working as kind of the overseers. This guy's got a stick that kind of is very threatening. Maybe like if a kid gets out of line or is slow in their work, he might hit him to make sure he's working efficiently. And then down here again, you can just see that this is a condition, just another factory where you see a lot of men actually in this picture working, but it shows the differences of conditions that were going on in this time. Just some more pictures here. This one just breaks my heart every time. This little girl in this factory just kind of looking longingly out of the window. You think about children, they should be playing, not, working for a living. There's a similar picture here, a young man who's working as a carpenter, and again, look at his face. It's just very sad. This is not something he should be doing as 9, 10 years old. These are some children who are working on a farm. Something to kind of keep in mind is that's why a lot of farmers had such large families, is because their kids would work on the farms with them. But again, they're not getting an education. Here's some more kids. They're probably coal miners working on the railroads here. And then finally, here's just another picture of women working in a factory. This picture, I think, is particularly sad, of these children in the city. You can see that maybe they're homeless, or maybe their homes, they're just outside their house. They're They don't have shoes on. I mean, you can just really see how poverty is rampant. This is just a man where he's sleeping. He's sleeping on 2 barrels, right? You can really see why there are some issues that really need to be solved. This is a tenement house. You see where they've got all their clothes hung up outside. Again, the children look very dirty. If you look down at the bottom, there's probably a lot of people living in that house. Maybe these are immigrants. And then, of course, this just shows a family of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 people living in one room. Look how they're all crammed in there. Just imagine that kind of life. You can really see why reformers are really pushing for this time period. These are just a couple political cartoons of Lafayette, and you can see how he's basically looking at how he is pro-reform here. So if you look at this particular picture, it says, for any old trust. Basically, he's saying he's going to bust up a trust, right? And then in this picture is just showing how, look at what's before and look at what's after. You know, before the railroads are strangling you, and in this picture, they're all working together, and it's kind of the model state. So these pictures deal with women's suffrage here. So here's the thing about women's suffrage is that women are half of the American population, right? But in most parts of the country, they did not have the right to vote. Now, this picture I think is pretty funny. If you look at it, the headquarters opposed to women's suffrage, who's standing outside of it, right? Who are opposed to it? Well, they're all men. I like to imagine this woman over here, she's looking at them like, y'all be crazy, right? Like, women have the right to vote. What you talking about? Down here, this is just a poster for a march that was held on Washington in March of 1913. Basically, it's a parade where women are trying to get for this right to vote here. Again, I love the way that the women are looking, very majestic looking, right? This is an actual photograph of the march. You can see the Capitol there in the background. So it's an actual picture of the march here. Susan B. Anthony is actually successful in what she had pushed for in 1920. The 19th Amendment is passed by the Constitution. It's ratified, but the last state that needed to ratify it was Tennessee on August 18th. It becomes law on August 26th. And like I said, we call it the Susan B. Anthony Amendment. And so for the first time in 1920, the other half of the U.S. population gets the right to vote and be involved in politics. So that's kind of a big step. The next thing that's really a big move for the progressives is Prohibition. So Prohibition basically means banning alcohol beverages. And this is a movement that goes back a long way. And this is largely a women's movement. You'll also hear it called the temperance movement. You might need to know that, temperance movement. And basically what they said is when alcohol is drunk, or when people drink alcohol, they are going to be inherently immoral because of that. It's mostly, they're saying, it's mostly men that are going out getting drunk and wasting the money on the family and like screwing the family over by going out and getting plastered. And they come home and we got to clean up their vomit and take care of them. And they're like, we got children to feed and what's with these drunkards out here? And they would actually go around and they would have like these groups. They would go around at night and like throw water on people that were passed out drunk in the street. I think this one is particularly funny. If you look at this, it says, lips that touch liquor shall not touch ours. In other words, shall not touch our lips. Personally, I don't know if I want to kiss any of those women anyway, right? Like, if I were a guy looking at this picture, I'm going, that's not a whole lot of incentive for me. Like, it's not like y'all are foxy or anything, right? But I just love that picture. I love the idea that it's saying here. Another part of progressivism was trying to make industry more effective as well as making it safer. This is something called scientific management or Taylorism. And basically the idea that they're trying to do is improve efficiency in working. So they start by doing simpler pieces. So this is something that Henry Ford kind of perfects, is the idea of the assembly line, where every worker has a different job and they work in order to do their small little part and moves down the line, and then they do their small little part, move it down the line. So the idea is that you're going to get people doing one job perfectly, right? And everybody can put it together. But they also do this by paying you by the piece rather than by the hour. So if I only made $3 an hour and it didn't matter how much I got done in those, 6 hours of work, I was still going to get paid at the end of the day. However, if I got paid by how many screws I turned that day, right, I'm going to work really hard and turn all the screws I can. So that was just another way that they work to kind of improve manufacturing, kind of make goods more effective and make work more effective. There are also a group of writers in this time period known as the Muckrakers, and this comes from an old book called Pilgrim's Progress. And so it's a derogatory term, and it is talking about how these guys are basically digging around in the nastiness, the muck, the dirt, the low part of society, and they're digging up and bringing it to light, and they're exposing a lot of the problems in society. So these were reporters. Let's talk about a couple of them here. First, we have Upton Sinclair. So Upton Sinclair writes a book in 1906 called The Jungle, and this is actually a fiction book, but it's historical fiction. And what he talks about is the meatpacking plants in Chicago, and he actually goes undercover to work in these meatpacking plants, and he describes some of the things that he sees, and what he finds is that pretty much when you're making sausage, everything and anything is going in to that sausage, going into that meat, like rats and rat feces, and sometimes even ground up bits of human being. Like if somebody loses a finger while they're working, the finger falls in the machine, and like that goes into your sausage, and you eat it, and it's like gonna ruin your breakfast. And yeah, gross. Think about that the next time you have a link sausage for breakfast. Yum. I should probably know that they don't do that anymore. But he kind of exposes some of the issues that are going on in those meatpacking plants and changes a lot of the food laws that we have there. Finally, we've got a woman named Ida M. Tarbell. So Ida M. Tarbell writes a book called The History of the Standard Oil Company. And I'm sure it's full of praise for John Rockefeller and all the amazing things that he does and how he just really is running this great company. Yeah, not so much. What this is actually is about the ruthlessness of the Standard Oil Company and kind of how he's taking advantage of people through his trust and how he's basically driving all of these other companies out of business. And she was able to write this book because her parents actually owned a very small oil refining company that John D. Rockefeller drove out of business and basically ruined her entire family. So her writing really adds an extra punch to this idea of trust-busting reforms. It's going to help lead to the strengthening of an act called the Sherman Antitrust Act. So the Sherman Antitrust Act is passed in order to make monopolies illegal, and this is something that she really gives a lot of credence to, and presidents that are going to become part of this progressive movement are going to really work on getting rid of those trusts. So think of what Lafayette was doing in Wisconsin, except on a federal level. And then the last two guys that we have here are Lincoln Stefan. So Lincoln Stefan writes a couple books called The Shame of the Cities and The Shame of the States, where he exposes a lot of the business and government corruption that's been going on during the Gilded Age, so leading to kind of more people recognizing political machines and what they've been doing and how they've been taking advantage of people. And then, of course, we have Jacob Riis, who is actually a photographer. He's the guy I was telling you about, who is a photojournalist. And so he takes a lot of pictures and then writes this book called How the Other Half Lives, where he exposes kind of some of the issues of poverty that's going on. And these muckrakers are really going to help back up what a lot of the progressives are doing and kind of how they're all working. And because of these guys doing their job, it's going to lead to the rise of federal government leaders who are going to take up the mantle of the progressive movement and really try and push this movement forward and get a lot of these reform passed. Men like Theodore Roosevelt, William Howard Taft, Woodrow Wilson, these are going to be our progressive presidents. So we'll get into class to talk about these a little bit more. Hope this was just a good overview for you guys in terms of the progressivism. And don't forget, always remember your car insurance with Flo.